Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2. How was the food festival yesterday afternoon? Good? Hands up if you tried the molecular whiskey. Fantastic. I was blown away. I'm a whiskey lover. I particularly have got into Japanese whiskies recently, and it blew my mind how quickly they can make that whiskey. So just over a year to produce something quite so tasty. And this has, just apart from anything, reaffirmed how technology now is changing how we make things. It's challenging the old ways that we do things, and we're going to continue to see that more and more over the next couple of years. Interestingly, one of the discussions that we had yesterday on the panel was around blockchain. That featured as quite a trending topic out of the app, the questions that you were sending through. Walmart yesterday have announced that now their suppliers, they need to subscribe to their blockchain infrastructure and system that they're putting up together. And I think this is going to really challenge, again, the ownership of data. When retailers start creating platforms like this, encouraging suppliers to go onto their systems, this is going to challenge who owns the data, and this is also going to challenge the traditional ways that we've done things. Today we've got some really exciting speakers coming up. We've got more future young leaders that are going to come up here, and we've got more industry experts that also have flown in and are going to give you some insights into what lies around the corner in the future. Two things from yesterday that stuck out really strongly. Data is our new oil in this world that we live in now. It's the most important resource that we have ever had on planet Earth. The next wave of disruption that we are going to see in every single industry are businesses and leaders that are able to harness the power of real-time data to make real-time decisions. This is going to be one of the biggest challenges we've had because real-time decision-making isn't in the culture and the fabric of the businesses that we've had historically. Startups and entrepreneurs are completely happy and excited about this new era, but existing old-world organizations, our infrastructure, the way that we behave will be challenged by this new wave that we're going through. The second one that is really interesting that we came out of yesterday from discussions that we're having out there is simplicity is the new perfection. Customers, consumers, they now expect everything to be absolutely simple. The reality is that we like complexity, we like processes, we like legislation which get in the way of us creating simplicity. Reducing the number of steps it takes to do something, that's what people expect now. Consumers, at the end of the day, expect simplicity in every single experience that they have. So those two trends we're going to hear more about today, and we're going to see that continue through. The support that we've had for evokeAG and the conversations that we've been having are a huge part of why we've got here today. And that support, to reaffirm that, we've got a message here today from the Honourable Jaclyn Symes. She is the Victorian Minister for Agriculture, Regional Development and Resources.
Welcome to day 2 of evokeAG, the nation's premier digital startup and innovative conference, all about agriculture and agribusiness. Of course, Victoria is just so proud to be the host of this conference. We are really at the forefront of innovation and digital technology and really welcome advancements in this area. So good luck over the next couple of days. Hope that your conversations are fruitful. Look forward to your ideas and enjoy your time here in Melbourne. When it comes to agriculture, we've got some really exciting things happening. We've got medicinal cannabis industry that is just going from strength to strength and a really exciting opportunity, particularly for regional Victoria in job creation. We've also got the Internet of Things, which is really, really exciting for our state and something that we're really passionate about. Of course, the Andrews Labor government is right behind all things startup, all things innovation, all things digital technology, everything that you guys are talking about over the next 2 days. And I really wish you well in your deliberations, your consultations and your ideas. And welcome to Melbourne and enjoy your time here.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the Honourable Jaclyn Symes. So our next speaker is an international leader in circular business practice. He's firmly committed to sustainable food manufacturing and also growing the Australian food industry. Anthony is a third-generation champion of Australian food and agribusiness industries. He is a passionate contributor and believer in the future of agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause and welcome to the stage, Anthony Pratt. Hi, Anthony.
Thank you, and thank you, Kay Hull, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Well, a bloke drives past a paddock and sees a farmer standing in the middle of it. He says, "Hey, what are you doing there?" And the other bloke says, "I'm trying to win a Nobel Prize." And the other guy says, "How's that?" The farmer replies, "They say you have to be outstanding in your field." Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I have a few points. Firstly, my first point is be prepared to back the next generation of entrepreneurs. There are multi-generations of farmers and food processors here today, and that means change. The rise of ag tech presents another new dimension, and a large part of my family's success was how they dealt with technological change. My grandfather's first business was an orange orchard in Shepparton. He thought that corrugated boxes was better for packing oranges than wooden crates, and so he went into the cardboard box business, which is today known as Visy. After my grandfather died, my father built it into one of the greatest private manufacturing companies, and he was our second generation entrepreneur. And my father thought that my growth as a business person would be enhanced if he gave me my own business challenge, and so he sent me to America to build my own business. And I believe there's no industry with a greater future than growing and selling Australian food. And the point of this story is, if you do have kids, give them their own patch of dirt to start their own business. And nowhere is truer than in agribusiness. The average age of our farmers is close to 60 years old. And Japan's onto this, and they're attracting young workers to farming with more flexible working hours and mentoring to spin off their own entrepreneurial food-growing businesses. And my second point is invest in technology to grow more with less, more profitably. We're at a bit of a crossroads in agribusiness, and while everyone believes that ag tech is the future, we currently only spend 12 cents per person per year in Australia in ag tech, whereas the United States is $5.80 per person per year. So that's 50 times more per person in America. So more investment is relevant as we approach the limit of water and arable land. And we only grow enough in Australia to feed 100 million people in this big Asia region that we're in of 4 billion people. So we might as well focus on those food products that are high value added and play to Australia's strengths of food safety and quality, which commands a better price, and which, as 3 billion Asians come into the middle class in Asia, they will have the disposable income to pay for. And technology will play a huge part of this, from restoring our degraded farmland through better soil retention and protecting water resources. And our closeness to Asia's burgeoning population and markets puts us in a big opportunity position. And how do we leverage that? Well, as I said before, we already feed enough for 100 million people, but that could be 200 million people. And to lift the value of our food exports, we need to lift our vision from the commodity products sold to value-added products sold. In other words, not just wheat and wool and live cattle, which makes us one of many producers that can sell that and exposes us to climate extremes and geopolitics. Here's just a few examples of that. In a drought year, our national commodity wheat production can fall by 60%. And another example is that Britain at one point bought half of all of Australia's exports. And then when they joined the European Common Market in the 60s, our agricultural trade with England collapsed. And here's an example from America. Because of America's trade war with China, America's commodity soybean production exports took a 46% hit. But unbelievably, America's exports of value-added food to China have actually increased, with cheese up 5%, ice cream up 20%, and almonds up 49% during the same trade wars. So what's the difference between soybeans and ice cream? Well, it's the difference between bulk commodities and high-value processed foods. For example, wheat sells for $100 a tonne. Flour, if you turn it into flour, it sells for $500 a tonne. If you turn that flour into bread, it sells for $5,000 a tonne. So what the world needs is safe, high-value, nutrient-rich foods like cheese, infant formula, wine, nuts, meat, and added value horticulture. And growing that sort of stuff sets us apart from our commodity competitors like Brazil, who then can't easily duplicate what we're selling. One leading company, I don't want to mention their name, but they have an infant formula factory in China that is running quite empty. But the same company has the same exact factory in Australia exporting to China, and they can't make enough to keep up with the demand. And that's because the Chinese consumers would rather buy product from Australia, which has our food safety stamp on it. Thankfully for us, the great rise in the Asian markets has set Australia up for a big wave of food production, innovation and trade, and now more than 70% of Australia's export, a lot of it food, goes to Asia. In fact, when we started the Global Food Forum in conjunction with the Australian newspaper, our exports of food were at 29 billion and we set a goal to double it, and so far up to 40 billion of food exports as we, as I say, transition from the mining boom to the dining boom. Food safety is a huge reason for that. Australian food safety is trusted, and that's top of mind for many Chinese consumers, especially when children and babies are involved. Aussie food brings safety, quality and trust. New technology is a huge key. For example, in America I know that Driscolls are growing strawberries in a way where the plant grows higher so that the worker doesn't have to bend down to pick them, which means that they get more access to labour. Blue River reduces chemical use on crops with computer vision for precise spraying. For grocery stores, Vocal systems use computer vision to monitor inventory levels, and machine scanning inside the fruit can now separate rotten and bruised fruit. And robot companies like Abundant are doing robotic harvesting of apples and berries, so no fruit is left behind on the vine. By investing more in added value manufacturing of food, we'll lift the value and competitiveness of food and fibre production. So what about jobs? Well, I think there'll be more jobs, not less, with this new added value supply chain. The term Luddite came from a rebellious 19th century person, a textile worker, Ned Ludd, who destroyed the newfangled weaving machines that he thought were going to take all of their jobs. But most people today won't even consider a traditional farming job like milking or shearing or shovel digging. They want a farming future that's fully automated. The costs of technology in addition to that are coming down. A robot used to have a 5-year payback, now it's got a 1-year payback. And that's why, as I said, we've championed this thing called No Fruit Left Behind, because it's aimed at tackling the farm labour shortage head-on with smart technology and more fulfilling work opportunities. This is even more important when you consider the ridiculous backpackers tax, which has made labour even scarcer for our farmers. So investing in technology on the farm and in food isn't just a nice to have, it's key to making sure that we've got great fresh fruit and vegetables at affordable prices. Today's school leaver with a passion for technology need no look further than the food and processing industry for a career. And we have to do more to attract school leavers to agriculture. At the moment, our universities, only 1% of them, of the undergraduates, study for agricultural courses. And we should really try and double that. Because right now, there aren't enough food graduates to fill all the high-tech food agri jobs. And those jobs, by the way, attract a higher pay, which will in turn attract more people. My grandfather would be amazed to know 70 years on that Visy has its own robotics company. So I'm convinced that Australia's farming and food sector holds the key to our nation's future prosperity as we transition from the mining boom to the dining boom. So I'd like to thank you all for listening this morning and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you very much, Anthony. Great to hear that technology continues to be a theme which we're going to hear more and more about today as we go on. We've got our first future young leader about to join us for the day here. He grew up 100 kilometres northwest of Longreach on a cattle station. In 2016, he was part of ABC's Haywire Youth Project, where he started a rural tourism initiative called Back to Bush. He is wearing a statesman hat, I've been officially told, so he's our first presenter to come on stage with a hat. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause for our first young leader today, Callan Daley.
Thank you, thank you. Good day, everyone. As you know now, my name is Callan Daley. Just to give you a quick background on myself, I grew up 100 kilometres northwest of a small town in central Queensland called Longreach. I went to a boarding school in Brisbane for 5 years. I took a gap year on a crop and cattle station. And then I did 18 months, a stint at University of Queensland studying a dual degree of chemical engineering and plant biotechnology. And in the last probably 7 months or so, I have taken a sort of a break to not only just reevaluate my career path, but actually reignite my existing passion for agriculture. And now, so I'm sure this is all sounding fairly familiar and expected and cliche, actually, since many of you would have assumed as soon as I walked on this stage, there's a farmer. And why was that? Why was it that you assumed that as soon as I walked on stage? Was it, my personality? Was it the way I walked? Or was it, could have it been my outfit? Was it the perspective? And did that perspective, as soon as I walked on stage, did society automatically assume that I was, less intelligent, less qualified, less professional, less educated? I'm probably fairly capable, maybe own some land. Basically, second class. And now, why could I not, why could I not be a professional, grass-fed beef producer, specialising in animal welfare, soil management practices, and chemical management? Why is that not a thing? It sounds to me a little bit like it's all about perspective and language. So, why? Why is agriculture no longer seen as a valid profession within Australia? Why was I never encouraged through school to pursue a career within agriculture simply because I had slightly higher grades? So, what is the slow decline of agriculture caused by? And this is a question that I'm sure everyone in this room has heard that echo chamber for years. I'm only 20, and I've heard that nearly my entire life. Why? What is causing it? And I believe I've had to realize over time that my ideas and passion are not world first or game changing, let's say. But, however, I believe in my short time, I have had to face a lot of the fundamental challenges that actually are adversaries to a career path within agriculture. 100 kilometres from my nearest town, 1,200 kilometres from the nearest state capital. It's a quite remote and isolated childhood. Partner this with intermittent floods, 7-year drought currently. It does not paint a pretty picture of a career in agriculture, and it's understandable why my parents did not openly encourage my brother and I to return to a life on the land. And this was not pushed either through my schooling. Never once was I pushed or prodded towards a career in agriculture, even though it was quite obvious that it could have been my potential passion. Luckily, I've developed that passion again, and I've realized why I want to work within agriculture. But it's a shame that a lot of young Australians don't get that chance and don't realize it. So I believe it's high time that we use our language, improve our language, to stop that subconscious, unintentional degradation of an entire industry. When I say to someone, I'm thinking of just doing a degree in ag science, my family are just farmers, cockies. It's that subconscious lack of pride that I'm addressing. Language is a big barrier, not just outside of agriculture, but within agriculture. And I think we really need to think hard and long about how we talk about ourselves, or else we cannot expect people to talk about us the way we would like them to. So, to sum it up, I believe strongly we need to use our language and technology to help improve agriculture's perceived reputation, to dress it up in the hypothetical suit and tie, take off the work shirt. So I urge you, and I urge myself in the coming years, to recognize that change that the world is going through and not be dragged along behind it, but be the industry that leads it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Callan. Our next session is very similar to yesterday in that it's also an interactive session. So again, if you haven't had a chance yet to download the evokeAG app, then get onto your App Store or Google Play Store, download the app and get registered in. Because at the end of the session, we're going to be taking questions that have been put through the app for the panel members to ask. So we've also got some mics, you'll notice, positioned around on the room here, on stands throughout the room, and we'll also be using those at question time. Please make sure that you speak clearly into the mics and also state who you wish to direct the question to when it comes to it. So now let's start the conversation about Agriculture 4.0, the next phase. Our panel members are, in order, first of all, John Harvey, the Managing Director of AgriFutures. Please give him a huge round of applause.
Howdy.
Hey, John. Also, Ethy, Levy, the founder of Impact Innovation, co-founder and Israel CEO for the Bridge Hub. We've got Emma Moss, the university student and AgriFutures Horizon scholarship holder, and Spencer Maughan, the co-founder of Finisterre Ventures. And facilitating the conversation today, we have, of course, the well-recognized and most respected and experienced journalist, Jenny Brockie. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm very much looking forward to this session and talking about where we're at, where we might be able to go with agriculture in Australia, and how we might get there. Welcome to the panel. Good to have you all here. Let's get straight into it. John, how do you think Australia is placed at the moment to head into the next few decades of agriculture? How are we doing?
Well, Jenny, my view is we're at a bit of a crossroads when you look at where we are, particularly in rural innovation. We've got a very, very proud history of innovating in Australia, And if you look at the developments that we've had in the agricultural systems here, they've been pretty impressive. So just to give you an example, in the rice industry, which is one of the industries that AgriFutures manages the R&D for, in the last 10 years, we've been able to double water use efficiency. That is, we can grow the same amount of rice with half as much water. And that's come through things like, really world-class breeding programs, new farming practices, and better farming systems. So it really, really has delivered, and we need that sort of research to continue. We need that sort of improvement to keep occurring. And a lot of that research has been done by our traditional research partners, universities, CSIRO, departments of agriculture, the research and development corporations, and we need that to continue. But in the last few years, we've seen this explosion of new technologies. We're seeing things like sensors, we're seeing Internet of Things, artificial learning, machine learning, robotics, automation, and it's brought into agriculture a whole set of new players. So to me, it feels like we're very much at a crossroads, and there's just enormous opportunity in Australia at the moment for us to take the next step and go forward.
And are we at the crossroads kind of pushing forward, or do you think we're a bit complacent?
Well, I think we're looking to push forward. I think the thing we've got to be really careful of is the rest of the world is also pushing forward very, very quickly. And the new technologies, they're global technologies. They don't recognise boundaries. In fact, a lot of the digital technologies have come from non-agricultural based sectors and come into agriculture. They've come from fintech, they've come from medtech, ICT, and we've got no room to be complacent. We are now, like it or not, we're on the global stage because these technologies don't respect boundaries. And so we've got to start thinking about acting like we're on a global stage. And to me, that's why we've run something like evokeAG here, is to really say, here we are, we exist, and we're part of a global community.
Ethy, you moved between Australia and Israel. How do you view Australia at the moment? How do you think we're faring with innovation in relation to food and fibre?
I think that, as John mentioned, there's an amazing momentum. Amazing momentum in terms of the openness of the ecosystem to adopt innovation and to look outward. And this conference, having so many nations present here and so many investors from different countries. So, we have an innovation hub which is based in Wagga, where we try really to open up the Australian ecosystem and connect it with some other ecosystems that are global leaders in terms of ag and food innovation.
And this is global, based in Wagga?
This is global, based in Wagga, offices in Sydney, and I'm in Israel. And the idea is to continue and expand this connection to other global hubs, bringing Australian technologies outwards, but also bringing relevant technologies into Australia.
Spencer, what's your view of Australia from where you sit as a potential investor? You're based in the US. Yep. How do you see us at the moment in this space?
Yeah, so look, it's very high potential from a lot of the things that you might want to see. There's a lot of capital in Australia. There's a really highly productive ag sector, sophisticated farming set, and then really great institutional infrastructure around science and innovation. So there's a lot of big pieces that could be quite exciting.
Could be.
Yeah. So because it's really lagging behind the rest of the world in a sort of pathetic way. Because there's and I'm a grad of Melbourne Uni. I did my PhD there, and I'm a huge booster generally of Australia. But it's not just ag. If we look at Gardasil, or if we look at Wi-Fi that Syro likes to go on about, they're great, and we've made money from that in the licensing agreements that were done. But we did not make Genentech, and we did not make Cisco, and so you sort of have to ask the question, which outcome is better? And I'm obviously a venture capitalist based in Silicon Valley, and I think, the ecosystem around those big companies and what that does for, both economic growth as well as just innovation growth in general is spectacular. So I think we're high potential, but we've got to work out and change the paradigm of how we commercialise technology.
Why do you think we're lagging behind the way you describe?
Well, yeah, that's pretty complex. So we did a study at the University of Sydney at the United States Study Centre to try to map out ag tech investing in Australia and do the comparison with at least the US and global market. I talked a little bit about that yesterday, so I won't bore the audience with more on that. But there's a couple of things that are clearly missing. I think one thing is that we do not have critical mass of commercial R&D of product development in Australia. So we attract a lot of multinationals, but ultimately we're purchasers of technology. And we're not really creating technology products. So we have sales and marketing organisations, whether that's in big ag, whether that's in the sort of large internet companies or anything else. We don't have commitment and driven by, I would say, probably the government. To really say we are going to increase commercial R&D here, and we are going to make sure that we have a critical mass in, whatever, pick XYZ company, and we're going to have 300 engineers, and they are now going to be globally relevant, creating a product that headquartered company back in Silicon Valley or in Tel Aviv or in Europe somewhere sees as a globally important and significant part of their future growth and revenue stream. And if you don't have that, it means that the communication of the Australian organisation as just a sales and marketing organisation is already, 2, 3, 10 pegs down the corporate hierarchy in terms of access. Because what they're doing is not that important. It's a tiny market and they're selling some stuff. It's accretive to the top line, but it's not that big a deal. Maybe if it was a bigger market, that would be a bit different. But I think you all of a sudden have different access. So that's just one thing. I think the other thing that's really missing here is connected capital. So there's been a really great growth in venture capital. From an institutional point of view, AVCal documents that pretty well, so I won't go into the numbers. But there's also a lot of family office money in Australia that tends to be still the predominant source of risk capital here. But I would say, unlike what Ethy experiences in Israel, and we talked about this before coming out, while there is a strong diaspora of Australians and others from technology companies in, say, the US and in the Valley, in LA, there's not that connection to the pools of capital here. And that you lose a lot of a network there. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and while it's sort of a dismal statistic because it lacks diversity, 40% of investors in the Bay Area, which accounts for sort of somewhere between 30 to 40% of global capital in this sector, have a degree from Harvard or Stanford. So the connections are pretty deep, that tight network, and I think that it speaks to the real importance of being able to syndicate deals and have partners there to drive growth. So those are my probably two main points.
Emma, I'm interested in your perspective on all of this as someone who's relatively new to this industry. How do you see the future?
I think that there's going to be a lot of rapid change. So for young people coming through agriculture, when I was born, I was watching The Wiggles on a VCR, and then it went to DVD, and then it was Netflix, and that's just in my short 20 years. So we're really used to rapid change, and people talk about the adoptive bell and the early adopters, but I don't think we're even conscious of adopting new change because it's just, there's a new iPhone, so we buy it. There's a new speaker, so we buy it. So I think that as far as adopting change, we are more thinking about, well, this is the potential next change. How do we go further than that? And so, yeah, as a young person, I think that we are preparing for big, fast changes all the time, and we're trying to think about how to think outside the box, but also there's always been an emphasis on collaboration and really working together. And I think, as you said, we're starting to see that with the venture capital and the big people, but even just small people working from a grassroots level. I think that we're going to see a lot of collaboration and, yeah, people trying to adopt quickly.
How do you think agriculture's viewed internally and externally at the moment? Because I know you use social media a lot, don't you, to give a kind of impression of what it's like in the real world to do what you do. How do you think it's viewed in Australia?
I think that depends where you come from and what your background is. So I have grown up in rural Australia with agriculture a fundamental part of my life, and that has changed my outlook. I am even just speaking to the future young leaders this week. People just think that agriculture is farming still. And I think that that comes down to people, a large portion, being disconnected from agriculture, but also not being taught that eating is an agricultural act. Engineering, marketing, there's so many aspects to agriculture, and it's so diverse, and it brings in so many diverse minds and people.
And what are you studying at uni?
I'm doing a Bachelor of Sustainable Agriculture, and I'm majoring in livestock production and agronomy.
From a global perspective, what's the world doing well at the moment in this area? Ethy, what do you think is...
So I think there's a number of areas that are now really kind of bursting. So if we look at the gene engineering, the use of data, so all the artificial intelligence that has come into the in the agri-food sector. I can share, some of the things that are done in Israel. So first of all, you mentioned all collaboration. And I think this is a key element in the success of the Israeli ecosystem in agri-food. There's a very, very strong collaboration between all the parties involved, so government, academia, industry, and all the entrepreneurs.
And how did you achieve that? I mean, how has that happened, that strong collaboration?
So it's part of our culture. Again, we're a very small country, so basically we can travel, and maximum of 4 hours to visit a company or to go to a different university. But I think it's also part of the culture, which is all about sharing. So if we see something interesting, we share it. We're always open to foreign countries to come and visit our institutions and see some of the programs that we have. Just an example of an initiative that was created by the ecosystem. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the WhatsApp platform, but in Israel we have a WhatsApp group which is called Israel AgTech, and we have about 350 participants, which is the maximum that WhatsApp allows. And everyone's on it. The investors, the government, the startups. And we're just sharing. If someone is reading an interesting article, we share it. If someone
Do you not go crazy getting 350 messages on your WhatsApp?
So first of all, it's muted, so you don't get notification all the time, but it's extremely useful. Even posting.
So just using really basic technology to connect people in a day-to-day sense.
Yeah, it's just one example, but if the Ministry of Agriculture or the Innovation Authority wants to issue a new program for supporting agtech innovation, they will bring in all the key stakeholders, so entrepreneurs and farmers, and build the program with them.
And presumably, if they know that conversation's going on anyway, they want to be part of it and connect with it as well.
Sure, but also they will adapt the tools that they're providing to the needs on the ground.
And from the outside, having visited Israel, the experience you have as somebody coming into the Israeli system is that it's seamless. So you might one moment be talking to a university and you'll then be talking to a startup and then you'll be talking to government. But it's a seamless transaction for somebody coming in, and it appears and looks like it's a well-coordinated, well-oiled machine. And on that note, I mean, in New Zealand with Peter Van Hilton and Agritech New Zealand, again, same experience is that you are chaperoned through the various government, academic, and startup and investor type players. And that, to me, is really important in terms of engaging with the rest of the world, is that we, as a country, make it easy for people to interact with us.
How do you, John, I got a question on that actually, if that's all right.
Yeah.
You know, because we touched on this a little bit, but you know, you're right. Like, there's my experience is a lot of friction in commercialising things, especially here, whether it's, you know, sort of protectionism between different groups and pockets of money and things like that, just even from the research side. What do you think can be done to make it more frictionless, I guess, that interaction, for, you know, even for incumbents in the country, not just people sort of coming in like me and my firm?
I think there's actually been a really fundamental shift occurring in our mindset, and it needs to occur. So traditionally in Australia, we're very much focused on doing R&D for our industries, and we've done R&D for the Australian marketplace, and generally we've done it for our particular sector of that reasonably small marketplace. And so the relationship's been with the RDCs, with researchers, with farmers, and that's been fairly direct. Doesn't cut it anymore. We're a population of 25 mil, and we're in a world that's got 8 billion, going to grow to 9.5 billion people. You know, we're tiny. These global technologies know no boundaries. And so we haven't, I don't think in the past, focused too much on the experience of some of our global partners when they come into Australia and want to collaborate. There's been lots of ad hoc, one-on-one relationships developed between researchers and researchers, and we've generally been very, very good at research. But to be frank, our market size, if we're just focused on Australia, is too small for a commercial player to come in and be successful. And so we've tended to use other mechanisms, extension, what have you, to get our message and get the results of R&D out to Australian farmers. And that's not going to cut it anymore with the global and with the digital technologies that don't respect boundaries. And so we do have to start thinking about the person that turns up, comes out of the gates of Sydney Airport and looks out there and says, now what do I do next? And we've got to make it easy for them to find the right people to connect with to be able to do business.
Spencer, what are some of the changes that are driving ag tech and food tech in the US? What's the scene there?
Yeah, so, and I sort of touched on that a bit yesterday. I think, again, it's really, I think the strongest driver is still the end consumer, actually. There's lots of other things enabling it, and there's obviously structural things within some of the large incumbent companies from a consolidation point of view, but a lot of these are reacting more to a huge consumer preference change in the States. So I made the point that a good friend of mine, Charlie McNary, who is head of International Farming Corporation, which is the third largest land manager in the States, he has a talk and he sort of says, post-World War II, the US you know, viewed high-quality food as something that was safe and consistent, and so processed food took off. And over the last sort of 10 years, the American consumer has very much changed to thinking that's actually not sort of quality food. Quality food is now more nutritious, it's a lot fresher, and it's local. And maybe there's ancillary issues too around sustainability and around carbon footprint and water use and so on. And so that has, you know, taken away about $20 billion of market share from the major CPG companies in the last 5 years. So just that pull-through mechanism of saying, this supply chain doesn't suit us and our preference means that you need to invent a whole bunch of different things, because a sort of, you know, large corporate farm feeding into Cargill, going to a processor and being, you know, producing spam is not really working anymore.
Especially the spam. Okay, let's talk. What are our greatest assets? What you know, we're talking about the need for change and disruption and so on. What are our greatest assets, do you all think, going into this next period? Emma?
I think that many communication barriers are down. So we all have the opportunity to be able to express our voice, our opinion, communicate with other people, find other people who all agree. So I think that's one of our biggest assets, is that we can have a voice not just within Australia but globally. I don't think that we can just think within Australia, because you're right, we are too small for that. So I think that's one of our biggest things, is we can communicate with everyone easily.
What do you think our biggest assets are, John?
So about 18 months ago, we did a series of regional innovation conversations, went around Australia and spoke to, and we just put it out there and said, come and talk to us. And we targeted what I would call emerging leaders. So people in that age group, 28, 35, and who was aspiring to be potentially leaders or in their first decision-making role. And having done those conversations, I think that's our biggest asset, is those people that are coming through that have grown up with these new technologies, that have grown up with Netflix and other bits and pieces, and with that passion for agriculture and that passion for change. So when we went around and talked to them, first thing to note is 70% of them, 70% showed up were female. And the second thing was they're not interested in traditional ways of doing business, joining organisations, farmer organisations. They want commercial outcomes. They want business outcomes. They are interested and passionate about agriculture, but they can see a lot of opportunities aligned with agriculture without necessarily having to take over the family farm. To me, that group and their passion and their interest is probably, it's I think our greatest asset in terms of Australian agriculture going forward.
Anyone else briefly want to comment on our assets?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's a long list of assets that Australia has. First of all, the brand. I mean, the Australian agri and food is considered, as a premium product overseas. So that's something that can really, really be leveraged. And you have such a spread of varieties of crops that you are growing in Australia. We see that, in Israel we have sometimes lots of research in certain areas, but we don't really grow those kind of crops in Israel. So Australia can be an amazing test bed for technologies and validation of technologies. You have, different climates. So if you look at Australia as a whole, it's an amazing place to come and trial new technologies, and from here commercialize them globally, because you have the brand, you have the logistic, you have the supply chain in place, and the geographical location.
So what do we need to do differently then to make the most of all of that?
I think that maybe to continue what Spencer started before, I think that one element that he didn't mention is the risk-taking. I think that when you speak about innovation, risk is crucial. And without taking some risks, you won't be able to achieve,
You've got to have backing for risks, though, and you've also got to be prepared to fail.
Yeah, completely. It's a culture. It's a bit of a mindset shift, but in Israel, the government's role is really to bridge this gap, and wherever private capital or private investors will not step in because it's too risky, this is where the government is giving funding. And I think that even the VC community in Israel, when we say early stage, it's really, really early stage and risky. And in Australia, when you say early stage investment, it's a few steps further. So it's on one hand for the investors to take more risk, but also for the agri-food community to take more risk and trial some of those technologies, even if it's not going to be commercial soon, or even if it's only going to be applicable in a couple of years.
Ian Proudfoot, you're the global head of agribusiness with KPMG. What do you think we need to be doing differently?
It's been interesting listening to the group talk, but for me there's 4 things we need to focus on. I agree entirely. The first thing is the consumer. If we're not producing a product the consumer wants to eat and tastes great and has a great story, then fundamentally we're not producing a product that's relevant in the international markets today. And I think we need to recognise the food system isn't one system, it's fundamentally 3 systems. There's a developed system on a day-to-day basis, developed system for celebratory food, and then there's the wide part of the population that are still eating for sustenance, and they all have different requirements. Then we've got to think about sustainability. I think if you go to Europe now, you get a very, very strong feeling that we are in this transition towards a low-carbon future. I think for Australia, you're perceived as being very behind in terms of your perceptions around the climate, and you need to sort that out and start really positioning yourself to recognise we have a different future in front of us. Technology is critical. How we apply technology is critical, but fundamentally, if you look at ag tech globally, it's solving individual problems. Nobody's thinking on a systems basis. We've got to start solving the problem for the farmer so it makes the change worthwhile. We're not seeing people adopting the technology at the moment. And the fourth one is, I think we've got to be able to tell stories. And fundamentally, just listen to the stories we heard this morning from the young man as a future leader and his connection to his land. If you tell those stories, they resonate with consumers and therefore connect people to the food they eat. Food is about the most intimate thing we do. We put it inside our body. So how we tell people those stories is critically important.
And there is a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there, between
Absolutely.
the storytelling and the actual daily activities of the average person?
Yeah, well, I'm from New Zealand, so to give you a story that promotes Australia, we talked to a buyer from one of the big groups in the Middle East, and he talked about buying beef, and he said he's Kiwi. He said he'd buy as much beef as possible from New Zealand, but he'll put it in the hot pot, the stir fry, the buffet, anywhere where he needs to call it beef. If he wants to buy a steak and put it on the center of a plate in a very fine restaurant and charge $150 for it, he's going to buy it from Robin or from the places in Tasmania, Robins Island, those sort of Cape Grim, those storied producers of food. And I think fundamentally for me, if you're not telling a great story that really excites the consumer, you're never going to be able to control a premium.
Well, let's hear a story, and a tech story, an ag tech story, and a really interesting example of innovation, I think, in Australia. Anastasia Volkova, you're a trained rocket scientist, is that right?
Correct.
Tell us about your startup and what you're doing.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Fluorosat, and what we do is scalable, predictive agronomic analytics. So that technology that connects the data that no one can make sense of or combine it and actually optimizes commodity crop production, because we all will need wheat and fiber. Even if we're building vertical farms for the foreseeable future, this is the way to feed the world and provide sustenance.
So this is a system for farmers. Just spell out how it works.
Absolutely. So this is the system for agronomists to support their decision, make them more effective, and it provides all of the layers of information that you possibly want with the CSIRO and proprietary crop models to deliver innovative ways of solving those problems. Identifies opportunities, where to put fertilizer, chemical, what happens, what yield increase they're going to look at.
And this is using drones and satellites. Just spell it out. How do you do it?
It uses all of the layers of the data. So it uses satellite imagery, drone imagery, aerial imagery, weather stations, soil maps, yield maps, everything that an agronomist would like to see on a hectare to make a comprehensive decision. And then an agronomic model takes charge of making that decision, produces a couple of scenarios, and says, this is how it localizes to your farm.
Mm-hmm. So you're using remote sensing and data that's collected by those drones to spot things like stress in crops.
Exactly.
And to feed that information back.
Nutrient deficiency, water logging, disease, those things that they can manage for.
And you developed this while you were at uni?
So I was midway through my PhD, which I came to do to Australia. I took a break from academia before doing a PhD, went and started two businesses with the technical co-founder of Fluorosat, and this is our third one. So in the academic journey, as a rocket scientist, I realized that the remote sensing had much to offer to agriculture. Than it had just to offer into oil or mining sectors, and we wanted to commercialize that technology. And given that CSIRO, the powerhouse of agricultural innovation globally, was here, it was obvious that the collaboration of putting the pieces together was what was going to solve it for optimal agronomy.
Okay, so how did you navigate the startup ecosystem? Like, how did you get it going?
Yeah, well, being European, you speak different languages. You want to find a common language with everyone, and it's a bit like Ethy was describing. You know, in Israel, everybody thinks collaboration. It's a small market, and as a non-Australian person starting a business in Australia, it's obvious to us it's a very small market, and we team up with researchers in how that collaboration initiated. So we went to state government for grants after our first customers gave us money. Second step was to go to RDCs and show them that we can commercialize their innovation. That brought CSIRO interest and ultimately venture capital from their venture arm Main Sequence. And here we are with more than 1,000 users globally in 7 countries looking at crops globally, million hectares. So that's where we put that analytics.
So it's growing all the time?
It is growing and by itself as well, yeah. So if you build the analytic systems with machine learning, they can adjust to climates.
And did you think globally from the beginning, or was that something that came as you started developing the idea?
Oh, Jenny, absolutely. You can't solve for global, you can't build technology without global market in mind. And as was mentioned, Australia is a unique test bed. We have all of the climates in one country. We did trials in 5 states in Australia, and that covered for pretty much every geography we wanted. Brazil and Argentina, US and Canada, and Europe. That was representative.
How are we going to feed all these mouths by 2050? I mean, I'm interested in what you all think food and fibre innovation is going to look like in the future. What do you think?
Well, at the moment, Australia produces agriculture's worth about $63 billion, I think. We feed about 60 million people in the world, and that's pretty good. We've got a population of 25, we're feeding 60 million. But you think of a population that's going to grow to 9.5 billion people, you've got to ask the question, what do we need to do, and what's our role, and how can we do more? And let's just say, best case scenario, let's say we doubled and we fed 120 million people instead of 60 million people. That's still a drop in the ocean. So the question is, what's our role? How do we play a bigger role? How do we contribute more to feeding the world? Because it is a huge challenge. And for me, there is a really obvious answer to that, and that is to help other countries produce food as well, and that's obviously through technology. And in doing that, we're generating wealth for Australia, we're generating respect for Australia, and we're really contributing to the globe. So to me, it is really critical that we start using some of these opportunities and some of these technologies and some of our brilliant people, not only just for our 25 million people here, but for the rest of the world.
And ideas too, you know, not just technology, but broader ideas around food and agriculture. And Adam Malonis, you're CEO and founder of Chew, which
Correct.
is a Boston-based food innovation lab. You're an Aussie. How did you get involved in this? Tell us how you got your business off the ground, what it does, and how you see the future.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm a chef. So I started my way into food was very simple. It was really started out of irritation. Nothing more romantic than that. The way that we look at how food is created, produced, how we talk about it. I was irritated. I was irritated with the divide amongst those who could obviously afford to eat extremely well, and those who can't, and those who can eat well typically try to press their particular opinions on food on everybody. We've hosted events on the top of mountains. We had 160 thought leaders, and the greatest thing they could come up with was let's encourage people in Middle America to sit down at the dinner table at the end of the day and eat dinner with their families. And I just said, look, this is ridiculous, right? This is what causes the divide, because the reality is they're working 3 and 4 jobs to feed their family. Now you tell them, get rid of one of those jobs and sit down with your kids. It doesn't work. So I started this company really to meet people where they are. Democratization
and this is a food packaging company, like a...
Yeah, which is you know, first of all, for a chef, it's a little bit of a weird journey. Second of all, it's an interesting conversation to have in many social circles, just because people think that packaged food is the enemy, but it doesn't have to be, right? We can be getting back to the basics as possible. Let's say we're going to eat all whole foods. That's good. But how do we meet people where they are today? How do we go into, we're looking at conflict zones, we're looking at developing countries, and in those particular scenarios, they can't necessarily afford to convert that food into bioavailable nutrition.
So how do you see the future for your business?
Yeah, so I think, it's all about scale. We keep talking about how we're going to feed the, 9, 10 billion people. I don't think it's going back to the basics. I think it's the democratization of good food. I think it's everything typically is solved at scale. So how do you create these large scalable models? And I think something that's come up in the panel a couple of times, you've got to figure out how to create the value-added conversion of those particular ingredients versus simply producing commodities, utilizing everything from the land, and then eventually selling it off as a commodity and having someone else convert it.
Yeah.
Amanda Garner, you're chair of the Australian Native Foods Peak Body, and Phil.
Yep.
Where do you see yourselves in all of this in the future?
Look, I can be fairly positive here. I think we are part of the solution for Australia for looking at new crops. We're the oldest. We have 6,500 native species in Australia. We are short of water. We are in drought. We've got climate change that people are talking about, and it's real. And farmers' crops are depleting in their commodity and what they can produce. We have all this ag tech and connectivity. What we're looking for, we have already. Our Indigenous foods are and can be part of the solution. And it's exciting, but we have such a large country, and we're growing gubbinge in the Cape York, and we're Kakadu plum there, and gubbinge over in the Dampier Peninsula, and bush tomato wild harvest in the Central Desert. We have wattle seeds that grow in every landscape in Australia that we're not harvesting. We need to commercialise. We need ag tech to grow our industry.
What's standing in the way of that?
Investment, ag tech, support financially from the government, I suppose, so we can actually really grow our industry. We are, when you talk about Brand Australia, we are that story that sells Australia. So I suppose we already have it, and we are and have that story, and I want to sell that. Overseas is wanting to buy our story.
Okay, what attracts capital and investment, Spencer?
Well, it depends. What capital you're looking for. So, if it's production agriculture, it's very different than what we do, or if it's processing or capex sort of spending, that's different than what we do. So, those are sort of different buckets which I sort of won't touch. But from a venture capital point of view, to understand venture capital just a little. So a venture capital fund is structured where you have a set of institutions or people that give a venture capitalist like myself, a company, money to invest on their behalf. And we get paid to do that by them. And ultimately, the fund is set with a 10-year horizon. So we take the money, so to speak, in sort of, the first year. We then can invest it for a set period of time, somewhere between 4 to 6 years, depending on how the fund is set up. And then we need to return that money with a profit within 10 years. And so already you can see the absolute focus on time within that. Not just because IRRs are linked to time, because the fund structure and the legal documents are a pretty tight timeline. And so as opposed to saying, creating a greenfield production, somewhere south of Kakadu or something that might have a 25-year vision or a 40-year vision, which is something that, again, economically is important to do, that wouldn't suit us as a fund. So we have to look at companies that we can invest in that can grow very rapidly. And so it is a very, very specific set of circumstances that allow that. You need to see an investment opportunity that is attacking a large, tractable market. There's a clear channel and path so that it can scale quickly if the product is really in demand. Typically, they're very high margin businesses. And ultimately, they need, I think, just an outrageously impressive team, because these are extremely hard things to do. If you think about building something from, zero revenue to $100 million US in revenue in, say, 4 or 5 years, that is a Herculean task, really. And so that is a part of the special sauce, even though it's sort of, a bit wishy-washy. And so, that's what attracts us, right? Where you have, a good technology infrastructure with interesting technology that can be commercialized with great teams, and those teams understand the market need and have access to it, or an understanding of how they would get access to it. And typically, there's been, some roadblocks along the way in Australia. As I said earlier, the commercialization piece has been confounding.
Etty, why are you smiling? I'm interested in what you think attracts investment.
No, nothing with Spencer. I just wanted to add something to the previous question, because you moved to the investment, but I think the part of how are we going to feed so many people is really important. And we haven't touched at all at the issue of waste. And I think that's a really important topic that I wouldn't want to skip. I think that today, with the waste that we're globally producing, we could actually feed those 9 billion people in the future. So reducing waste is really, really critical. And I think that Australia could be a leading player in that space, both in terms of supply chain, packaging, and Visi is working on the number of very interesting technologies to reduce waste, but also post-harvest technologies. So I think that this is something that Australia could really lead. So that's one area that that could solve this issue, but also looking holistically, and also Ian was mentioning before the consumer and focusing on the consumer. I'm sorry to say that I don't agree with that. I actually think that we need to look at agriculture in a holistic way, and not forget the farmer, and not forget everyone in that ecosystem, and work holistically to make sure that everyone in that ecosystem is sustainable. So again, supply chain and all the different elements in that ecosystem. So also looking at the different crops, maybe rethinking, is that the right thing for Australia to produce? Maybe we need to change and move to something that is more high value, more nutrition, higher nutrition value. The issue of proteins as well is a very important area that could be looked at. So really look at it a bit more holistically.
Emma, you were nodding there around sustainability and waste.
Yeah, I think so. It has to come from two areas, and it's a shift in mindset, which I think when you say we need a change in mindset, everyone at first, I think it's natural to arc up at that. But you look in the past, people used to all smoke in pubs, and passive smoking was such a normal thing, and now that's changed. And littering, everyone used to litter, and now there's hardly any litter. So a change in mindset is possible. So firstly, I think a change in mindset from producers, and Brad Jones did a really great breakout session in it yesterday about producers, instead of thinking about how many tonnes per hectare or how many kilos of beef they're producing, changing it to thinking about their return on investment. And so that goes to, am I doing the right crop? Can I be thinking about other things? Should I be investing in more soil moisture probes and satellite imagery so that I'm getting the best bang for my buck? So it's not necessarily putting a kilo of urea on to get this tonne per hectare, it's which is the most, makes the most sense financially. And then the second thing is the mindset of consumers. So we're heading towards consumers, they're going to have tailored nutrition. A lot of things are going to be more personalised because communication barriers are breaking down, and transparency will be a thing. By 2050, we will so easily be able to see where this broccoli came from, who packaged it, where it was trucked. And because it's personalised, that is to people who can afford in Europe to buy an Australian steak, or that is people in lower socioeconomic areas wanting to just be able to feed their kids fruit and veggies. So that might be the ugly looking squash that still has the same nutritional value. So I think it's the mindset of both producers and consumers.
I just want to
add on the native foods, because I think it's really, really important, and come back to that, because we've largely been seen as an exporter of bulk commodities. And Ian, you talk about we need the story to go with the product. And I just think there's just a huge opportunity to marry the two together. You get a beautiful steak from Australia, and it's got some sort of native food a Kakadu plum sauce or something, but something that identifies the whole meal as being Australian.
But where's the investment for that going to come from? Because from what Spencer's saying, that's not something he'd leap at necessarily. Is
No,
it? Or am I not representing you well here?
No, that's very accurate in terms of specifically if there was, okay, we are going to develop, like the Resnicks did with Pom Wonderful or something. We're going to go out, we're going to spend a lot of money, and we're going to create a new product line around a new specialty good or something. That we wouldn't fund that part. But the piece that might play into that is that there's new technologies or new agronomic tools or so on that would have to go in to create that part of the supply chain. Whether that is monitoring the crop and something like Anastasia has that needs a particular yield monitoring specific for now a brand new crop, that might play into that, and we would look at that. I do want to hit on the point too around investment and drivers of the opportunity. And sort of marrying, I guess, maybe Ethy's pushback and his comment about consumers, that, I think that is still the massive pull-through driver, is this change. And I'd say going back to one of Australia's assets, which is a global asset, found everywhere, are younger people, that are driving this change. And I would say, I mentioned yesterday the story of Montgomery Ward, which invented catalogue shopping, which was, then spurred them to be, the number 1 and 2 back and forth with Sears, largest retailer in the States. And it turned out my grandfather was head of Montgomery Ward's just after World War II, and there was a dynamic shift of consumer preference to say we don't want to live in cities anymore. And Montgomery Ward missed that, and it's why none of you have heard of that company's name. And so I think that a shift in consumer ultimately, is where the rubber meets the road in that whole chain. And so if there is a big shift in terms of what they want, the rest of the chain is going to have to adapt. It doesn't mean that that's not important, but it means that technologies all the way back down are going to have to support that end decision where, the biggest chunk, in the sense, per gram of whatever's being produced is paid.
Eugene Wong, you're listening to all of this. You're an investor from Singapore. If you're going to invest in Australia, where are you looking? What are you looking at and for?
Yeah, we believe that we are investing in food tech and agri-tech, particularly in areas that will change the way we produce food, the way we eat, the way we deliver food. So, like the grasshopper that you had yesterday, we were pre-seed investor and seed investor. In Australia, I think there are many great stuff. You have a very good agriculture mindset, and you have technology. We have seen some startups from Australia. And I think echoing what John said, most of the startups that we've seen, maybe we haven't seen enough, so that's why I'm here in Evoke. They focus on a solution or platform for the Australian market. And echoing what Spencer said, I mean, for venture capital, we want to invest in startups that can serve the world globally. I mean, you look at Asia as 3 billion people. We want to be able to find a startup from Australia that can serve 3 billion people in Asia Pacific.
So are you not seeing that mindset, that global mindset here at the moment?
Like I said, maybe I have not seen the full
You don't have to be overly polite.
The few startups that I've spoken to, they want to serve the farmers in Australia. And if you look at the population of 25 odd million people in Australia, that's quite small. There's about 450 million farmers in China. So if you look at that, if I take an Australian platform and serve the China market, that will be a great venture capital deal, because if I'm going to get 8% return a year from an Australian startup, it won't meet our threshold of having 10 times return in 5-10 years. So I think the return part is critical.
So do you think the ideas are good, but the mindset's not broad enough? Is that the way you describe it, or do you think the ideas are a bit wrong as well?
I think the ideas are good. I think it boils down to a need. the mindset and the need, because Australia is very blessed with a good consumer market. But in Singapore, we don't have farmland. We are going up the vertical farming and waste management. And I guess same with Israel, there's a need. The entrepreneur from Israel will pick up his bags and go all over the world to get money, go all over the world to find partners. I think that mindset, if we could tweak it a bit in Australia, I think it's a winning formula, I think.
Yeah, Eugene, I was just going to say, I always say that the Australian market's big enough to be complacent, but not big enough to build a big company. And so, unfortunately, a lot of them fall into that first part and build for the local. And you can create what I would say, it's a bit pejorative, I guess, but a nice lifestyle business, but it's not really a VC backable one. Anyway.
Yeah. Stephanie, Dr. Stephanie Fay, you're the CEO of Austrade. You're nodding your head listening to all of this.
Yeah.
So why? What do you agree with that?
I think we've got fantastic innovation in this country, and I agree with Eugene that sometimes our companies are not thinking big enough. And in Austrade, we have what we call landing pads located in 5 locations around the world. So we're encouraging our startups to go and be resident in those landing pads so they can see what global competition looks like. We're able to introduce them to their first customer and also introduce them to investors. But primarily it's about our startups being born global and being able to have huge ambition and to think about the global economy first, not just the Australian economy.
And Jenny, sorry if I can add, so just to add, so at the Bridge Hub, we're actually taking a delegation of Australian startup in agri-food tech to the landing pad in Tel Aviv, really to expose them to what's happening globally and to try to bring back a bit of this spirit and global vision when they come back and build their business here in Israel. So we're doing that jointly with Austrade. So it's a cooperation between the Bridge Hub, and that's going to happen at the end of April, and it's open now for application. But really, the landing pad is a really good example of how to expose the startups here. And again, bringing visitors from overseas and creating those links, and when taking startups on the commercialization journey, but with a global outlook from day one, I think that would be really the key for. Yeah.
I'm very aware of the time, and I really want to go to questions because I'm sure people will have a lot of them. But I just want to move on quickly to a couple of really important things I think about the future that we need to kind of factor into this conversation. One of them is, just what farms are going to look like in 2050. I mean, in terms of workforce, what type of education and training people are going to have in those farms. Can we deal with that first? I mean, what is the future looking like in terms of how that'll all work?
Emma.
Well, I think that, to be truthful, we won't know because there will be that much technology and things available out there that we possibly can't even conceive is possible right now. So I think a lot of processes will be automated. People on farms will be pretty well directly in contact with their producers in some way or another, because I think that, as we touched on before, we have to produce our food in the way that the consumers want it. So I think that there will be a lot of automation. There will be a change in mindset of sustainability because we are so in touch with our consumers. That's incentive to be the best farmers, the best producers that we can be. But as far as training and education goes, I think that's a hard one because I can't remember the statistics exactly, but they talk about kids at school now, over 50% of the jobs available when they graduate aren't even a thing yet. So I don't know, I just guess you have to put your best imagination hat on and just try, and probably not robots flying through the air, but that kind of difference.
Because there will be impacts on human workforce, all those kinds of things that are going to have to be dealt with. And Ethy, I know you're really interested in this whole area, just in terms of getting people thinking about it.
Sure. I think that we can have a look, at what's happening in Industry 4.0, because the panel is Ag Tech 4.0, but there's lots of similarities. So obviously, having more IoT and artificial intelligence, it's going to change the way agriculture is going to look. But I think that for the best, and it's very important as well to look at the workforce and the training. So providing the necessary skills to use technology, but in the overall, I think it's going to be for the benefit of everyone. So I think that farmers will have a better life-work balance. Consumer will have a better understanding of traceability and the source of their products. And I think that in Israel, some of the agriculture, or most of the agriculture, is intensive farming. So I think that this is going to shape as well. We will see more and more intensive farming and sustainable agriculture.
And what about climate change and changes in conditions? I mean, are people going to have to get used to more of that? And is that going to lead to a need for more innovative solutions to more adaptability, I suppose?
So,
anyway.
Farmers are used to adapting. That's just how it is on the land. And I think often when I talk to farmers, they look at climate change. They know it's happening. Like, they don't challenge that. But I think there's this inner belief that they have always adapted. They've always changed. That's been part of their psyche, and they'll keep doing it, and they will cope. But I just want to go back to that question about the skills, because we've always had this mindset. We've got to keep people from the land. We've got to keep them on the land, and I just think it's completely different now. We've got to attract people from the cities into careers in agriculture. We're going to need data analysts. We're going to need people that understand artificial intelligence. We're going to need people that understand a whole range of other things, and it doesn't matter where they come from. We need them, and there's fabulous careers in agriculture, regardless of what your background is.
Okay, we're going to go to questions in a minute. What needs to change, and what's the role of government in all of this?
I've already pointed fingers and things, haven't I? So I might as well jump in and underline them a little bit. I do think, look, I think there needs to be encouragement with a lot of the sort of millennial generation in terms of, pushback around, traditional routes out of university are not the only way. I remember when I was doing my honours year in genetics at Melbourne Uni, and I was head of the Genetic Student Society, and I said, I think that the head of the genetics department and the head of biochemistry or something, and said, what I really would love to do is do a job fair, sort of like they do in commerce, and get KPMG and a whole bunch of other sort of groups in to talk about careers. And they looked at me, and they, one of them led it, but they both clearly were thinking. And he said, "Why would we ever do that? We want you to do this." And I just thought that sort of ossified thinking of there's a couple of routes, and all through the university system you have. You graduate, you go to Minters or Freehills, or you go to this or that, and it's all very. And I think the millennials are sort of changing that and looking at doing different things, and I think that's important. And then from government side of things, I think that there does need to be a concerted, collaborative effort breaking down the walls between states and federal, so that you can have a more frictionless collaboration, like you see in Israel or like New Zealand, that doesn't have the state issue, as well as they need to attract product development from soup to nuts, critical mass in industries that they think are important. It doesn't have to be ag. I would love it to see it there, but it could be any industry, and actually, support that and have a long-term vision to support that, so that you start creating technology products and allow then young people in those businesses to have access to market thinking and be on the sort of cutting edge.
And as we just wrap up this section, can I invite any of you with questions to go to the microphones here, because we are going to go to questions in a moment to the panel, and I'm sure some of you will have questions, so they're all there if you'd like to line up. Just getting back to role of government and what next? What do you think, John?
I reckon government has a really critical role to play, And again, when you go around the world, the ecosystems that are working well are where government is completely connected into industry. So in New Zealand, you know, again, there's common view about what they're trying to achieve. It's shared between government, it's shared between industry. They're on the same page, there's conversations, same in Israel. And to me, connecting government, it's got a critical role to play. Connecting it into industry, connecting it with farmers, connecting it up with the startups is going to be is one of the critical things we need to do right now.
Ethy?
Yeah, I think that the government can really kind of shape the focus. So try to look at Australia as a whole and see what other areas that we are going to focus on agri and food. And I think the other thing is the government needs to be very agile. So be able to change and shift the focus if needed, change the tools that they're providing. So not really, you know, decide something and that's it, but agility and focus, I would say.
All right, let's go to some questions over here. Yep.
Hello, I just had a question to the panel.
If you could just go in a bit closer to the mic. Yep.
Sure thing. I had a question for the panel around what are some examples of public research organisations in other countries and how they've invested in ag tech and having a global focus in the benefit from the research. I think John certainly highlighted that's going to be a challenge for Australian agriculture given our focus on local industry benefit.
Eddie, that's a good one.
I didn't hear the beginning of the question, so...
Just repeat the beginning.
I was just interested in some international examples of public research organisations funding in ag tech for a global benefit.
Yeah, sure. So in Israel, we have lots of research in agriculture, which is partly from universities and partly from research centers. And we have very active TTOs, which are the technology transfer organizations. So they're basically going and chasing the researchers to find interesting researcher and IP and helping them commercialize. But in addition, we have about 5 VC funds that are literally relying on IP from university. And so they're really also looking at the research and interesting solutions and investing into that. So there's this really, you know, integrated system.
Okay, because I've had my back to this side of the room the whole time, I'm going to go to you next.
Kia ora, everybody. I'm Tina from New Zealand. My question was around, and it did get a tiny bit of airtime, but I'm just interested in whether, particularly you, Spencer, from a VC perspective, what emphasis you give to inclusion of Indigenous elements into when you're looking at your range and you're looking at social governance and environmental impacts. We've talked a lot about sustainability, but I haven't heard any of that cultural integration kind of considered in some of the conversation.
Yeah, it's a very reasonable question. There's lots of ways that you can take it. If we're looking at on the investment side and venture capital firms, there's no diversity, and it's a shocking gap, right? So already that's going to be a huge impediment to investing into whether it's a diverse team or even, I think, a much broader picture in terms of what's investable. So they are, you know, all white guys from Harvard and Stanford in the Valley in tan pants and blue shirts, right? And that is a bad thing.
Sounds boring to me.
Yeah. I've totally got what they look like.
Good. I hope I've hit that hard enough. That is an issue. One of my ex-partners from a previous firm, puts out a really good blog about the lack of diversity, actually. But so I do think that there's an issue. I would say that it's the only place that I've seen, at least in sort of ag tech, has been looking at indigenous, almost nutraceutical type components from plants, which has had a lot of interest in Brazil, a lot in South Africa. New Zealand too has an amazing library of microbes and things that is very sort of relatable, I guess, in that context. But otherwise, it's a big deficit.
Okay, I'm going to have to move on because we've got a lot of people lined up here. Yes.
My question is about education. You've talked a lot about ag tech and creating entrepreneurs and startups that think globally. As a teacher, are we failing our students to prepare for this this world? We're still using traditional education methods. and as teachers, we don't get a lot of exposure to what you're talking about. So how can we teach our students about this? Why don't we have more partnerships, say, with people like yourselves or coming into schools? I'm just interested in your
Okay,
ideas.
Emma, I'd like you to kick this off.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Joanna. I definitely see that gap in education between schools to universities to real world. There are some people trying to start to bridge that gap, certainly. I'm trying to do it myself, but obviously I can only get to a certain amount of schools a year or whatever. But I think that the education system, without being super knowledgeable about it, has to change. I mean, at university, we had to do an exam and it was still all rote learning. And I think that's ridiculous, because if I'm out in a paddock and don't know what a plant is, I'm just going to Google it. And so we need to change our education accordingly. And I think that, yeah, you're
Provided
completely
you've
right.
got access to broadband.
Yes.
Well, that might be another topic, Jenny, but
We won't go there.
No, we won't. But I think that, especially in high schools, the biggest thing that we are doing, I think, badly in agriculture is not explaining why people should care where their food comes from. And I think that we need to get into schools more. I agree, and there are some people, and us future young leaders have kind of made a pact with ourselves to even make a change about that, getting into schools and talking about that. Because if people are disconnected from agriculture, they're not going to care where their food comes from, but most importantly, they don't understand why they should care.
Okay, John, just
Yeah,
briefly.
look, we totally agree, and we've been piloting a program called Startup Biz, where we teach entrepreneurial skills using agricultural examples in 6 schools across Australia, and we're looking at the possibility of expanding that. But we totally agree, entrepreneurial skills, and this is in year 10, that sort of age group, and using agricultural examples to try and bring it back to ag. Yep.
Okay, Levy here.
Thank you. My question is going to follow the same theme, so I'm going to try and push you a bit more. AgriFutures, you seem to have a position that would marry beautifully into the education system. We have young people from farms who could be these startups, but I noticed this theme of agri-tech startups coming from medtech, like you said, and fintech, but there's people on farms that are not pursuing agriculture as a career because they don't see the path. So what else needs to happen? Who else should be responsible for making sure that students across the board, particularly rural students, know how much opportunity there is in this industry?
Whoa. Look, great question. A couple of things. The first thing is there is enormous energy there and enthusiasm and passion. When we did the trip around Australia and we met with 150 people, we actually put them into a Facebook group, and I think that's grown to something like 500 or 600 people now in that group, all young people wanting to be involved in agriculture, passionate about agriculture, but also interested in ag tech startups. We've got the business startup trial that we're doing in schools. There's so much more that we could be doing there. I guess my last point really is just also not just focusing on rural schools, it's also city schools that need to be involved, because that's where a lot of our workforce in agriculture is going to come from. So they also need to be included in that process.
Ethy, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I think that's, you need to turn the agri-tech startups into rock stars. So, you've got Anastasia here and you've got many other examples, but the more exposure that they will have, the more people will want to be the same and will want to follow that path. So really make it a bit more sexy and a bit more, exciting, and give them a good coverage. In Israel, the newspaper, they're full with stories of innovation and startup and lots of agri-food stories. So, we have now an amazing shift in Israel of entrepreneurs that had a huge exit in cybersecurity, now moving into ag tech. And we see that a lot. So it's just a question of exposure.
Gentleman here, yes.
Thank you guys. Fantastic session. My name is Michael Chandler from Primex Connect. We are a software that connects buyers and sellers of international and domestic meat, beef, lamb, pork, goat. So increase efficiency, decrease the friction, and increase ease of doing business. One thing we haven't touched on this morning, which I'm interested to get your points are, is the role that e-commerce will play. We've touched on the new generations coming through, such as millennials with their new tastes, such as sustainability, et cetera, but also that dovetails into buying patterns. So I'm interested to understand your take on the role that e-commerce is going to play in the future. Thank you.
Who'd like to go?
Sure, I can jump in a little bit. I mean, yeah, e-commerce is going to be huge, and it's probably a very expansive view I have of that. So there's obviously the well-known marketplaces out there, at least in the States. There's ones that are, on the food side, there's all the meal kit type things that including the listing of sort of Blue Apron, and then you've got more niche players like Good Eggs, which is super fresh food delivered. Those Instacart, all of those. From a consumer-facing point of view, I think if you're looking at digital transaction space, further down the chain, obviously Farmers Business Network is one in the States that's certainly raised a lot of capital. It is a little tricky within those supply chain pieces, just with the dovetail of global trade as well as regulatory, how you get to critical mass. So I think it'll probably evolve from a slightly different area where a company is tackling one very, very specific problem of value in the chain that then morphs into being able to do transaction when they get to a footprint that's big enough, rather than starting out as a platform transaction base within that chain. That's just my guess.
Yes.
Thanks, Jenny. My name's Alicia. I'm from Western Australia. I have 17 years experience just in agricultural education. My primary purpose for being here is to connect with industry and people here. So one of my frustrations over many years has been that when we talk about capacity build, we don't really talk about a future workforce. And I guess as investors, you need to see return on investment, which is very hard to do in the education system. I'd like to just make a comment about what Anthony from Visi said earlier about how to attract more school leavers. It's not about attracting more school leavers. It's about hitting the kids back in year 7 and integrating into curriculum, upskilling the teachers so that then they become the people that then for years, many more years, sustainably educate the kids. There's great programs out there. They're not even scratching the surface of what we need to do in terms of an industry. So I would like to invite everyone that's interested in terms of the education side of things. I've had state and national roles leading agriculture education, and I'd like you to organise a brain date with me, please, as soon as possible.
Okay, we've just heard a pitch rather than a question.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I had a question about, I guess, the opportunities in rural areas.
Can you just tip the mic up? Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in rural areas, I guess most of the development comes from cities, and all the incubators and that sort of thing are based in Melbourne and Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, that sort of thing. But as I think John mentioned, most of the software means we can do these things anywhere for a global aim and project. So how can we leverage that, I guess, now connected society to take some of these opportunities to rural areas and get that input from people on the land in that setting, rather than from perhaps people who are developing solutions for ideas or problems they might not necessarily come in contact with.
This is one of
Excellent
pet
question.
topics.
I mean, this is the reason that we've decided to establish the Bridge Hub in Wagga Wagga, so regional New South Wales, because we think that if you really want to bring innovation into the ag and food sector, you can't be located in a central city. You have to be close to the farmers, close to the ecosystem. So we hope to see more of that happening in Australia.
Yep.
So a yes is the answer to your question. Yes, it can be done and it should be done.
And can I just add a little bit to that? Because we actually moved from Canberra to Wagga as an organisation, and we accessed a whole new dimension of talent in that process and gave us opportunities that we would never have had, including running an event like this out of a centre of Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. I'd like to make another point too on this, because in Wagga we have Dan Winson, who is running a small company called AgriNet, and he was a TAFE teacher in Wagga, and he saw a problem. He was given a challenge at an AgriHack where they said, make farming more efficient, and he said, well, the biggest problem farmers have is they don't have internet connectivity. And he's developed, through his skills, what's referred to as sleepy Wi-Fi, which reduces by 90% your battery, and your solar costs. Now, that's in Wagga. He's servicing the Wagga area, but his technology is scalable. He's installed on a 30,000 hectare farm in West Australia. He's installed in Northern Territory. His business can scale internationally. So there's no doubt you can do it from a small place like Wagga Wagga.
Yes.
Hello, so my question's also geared towards agricultural education. So obviously we've spoken a lot about getting the kids involved and getting the kids excited about agriculture, but my question for you is how are we going to get the teachers excited about agriculture as well and promoting that? Because really, you know, you have a few teachers, the school I went to had 600 per year, 3,000 kids in the school, and not one teacher spoke about agriculture. And say we do implement this national curriculum, that's great, but how are we going to make sure the teachers also value this national curriculum so that it's not just seen as a blood subject, but a subject to take if you want to be in the future, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be big in all parts of a global issues. So.
Emma, have you got any ideas about that?
Yeah, I think that comes probably back from two things. So one, if people understand more why they should care about where their food comes from, that can change their perspective. But I don't think necessarily introducing compulsory agriculture as a subject itself is necessarily the answer to raise awareness about agriculture. It's incorporating it into the existing curriculum. So, you know, from a primary school age, you're counting how many eggs from underneath the chickens, and later on there's social science issues, and there's so many different ways that you can incorporate it into the current system. So I guess.
But how do you get the teachers to do that? That's your question, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the kind of the shift in mindset is in one way, but I don't know. Someone else might have a better answer, but I think if you're just incorporating that into the curriculum, that's one way to start.
Etty, what happens in Israel? Is it more present in teaching in schools?
I think that every school in Israel has their own garden where they grow fruits, vegetables, and herbs. So there's, you know, a bit of activity around agriculture. But we don't.
Is agriculture part of the kind of school system or teaching? I mean, is it part of what's taught and learnt?
I'm not sure that there is an agricultural subject at school per se, but there is awareness to agriculture, and obviously agriculture is part of the culture in Israel, so everyone has someone living in a kibbutz or someone growing something, so it's a bit more, we're more connected. I mean, there's no one in Israel that hasn't been on a farm in his life.
It's again that size. Time for one last quick question, yes.
I'm Laura Matiasi from Westpac Agribusiness. I've got a question around climate change. And climate change is impacting all our, aspect of life and power price and, drought and agriculture production, but even some of the arising, some of the activist movement in our sector. So I'm really keen to hear your view. What leadership role as an industry we can play to shape climate change rather than potentially falling victim to this impact? Thank you.
Okay, John, what leadership role can you play in that area?
Well, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, I think it's farmers in our industries are good at adapting. All of the things we've been talking about today about improving the production system, agri-tech, new varieties, what innovation is about making farming better. And those technologies can all be used to make us more efficient in terms of our water use, for example, or in different climate environments. The rice industry, as I said earlier, doubled its water use efficiency in 10 years through breeding and different practice changes. My view is it is an issue out there. We've got to be aware of it. We've got to understand it. But we've also got to be confident. We've got to be confident that we can adapt.
Etty, how does it factor into your thinking?
Yeah, I think that in overall technology is going to reduce the risk from climate change. So if you have predictive technologies, if you have intensive farming, if you are aware of what's going to happen, then obviously you can prepare better. So I think that technology is really, one of the key answers to climate change.
I don't think that's enough, sorry. I think we actually need to get on social media. That is just such an untapped area that we're not using enough. There are so many people opposed to different production systems, and they've got loud voices, and social media can attract so many different people, and I think that's somewhere where we really need to improve on in agriculture.
Okay, we are almost entirely out of time. low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit, John, that could be changed in this sector in Australia to boost the opportunities?
So from my point of view, the low-hanging fruit is how do we make it easy for some of these new players to connect into our rural innovation system? Yesterday, the Minister for Agriculture, David Littleproud, introduced evokeAG, and we are exploring the evokeAG concept, which is very much about how do we actually make it easy for those players to connect? How do they find the right researchers, the right expertise? How do they find, if an investor's coming in, how do they find the startups that they could actually invest in? To me, the low-hanging fruit is some of those really basic questions, making it easier for our new players to actually engage in our rural innovation system.
So connection.
Absolutely.
Okay, what do the rest of you think? What are the things that this group could immediately be looking at to improve the positioning?
Definitely collaboration and, talking a bit more to each other, sharing some of the challenges, some of the solutions that you're exposed to, and supporting the startup ecosystem. So be open for startup to come and chat with you and get your feedback about their technology, about trialing some of those technology. I think it's really, really important. You will see the benefit from it on the long term.
Mm-hmm. Spencer?
No, I was just going to reiterate that I think just getting rid of sort of parochialism that Australia hangs on to between states, cities, everything, and being able to just say, let's have a concerted effort to all, share and try to build this.
And Emma?
Social media. Don't just be present, be active, be proud of your industry, share what is happening, and that's just the start to traceability, I think, and that's very important.
So much more we can talk about, and I'm sorry we haven't gotten to all the things that we could talk about, but we've tried to get to as many as we can. Thank you all so much for your input and you for your input. Would you please thank our panel?
Thanks very much to all of the panel and also all of the engagement on social media. There's heaps of questions that have come through and also big topics of storytelling and how data can help us to engage with our consumers. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel, John, Ethy, Emma, Spencer, and also Jenny.
Thanks. Well done. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're going to go to morning break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking about what we can learn from the global trends around startups and what the future looks like in that ecosystem. Thank you very much.